Chapter 2. Fit to be Tied. Luz had a piece of paper with her schedule printed on it. A half-empty notebook she started to fill at Dover in her advanced European history class last year. 2 number 2 pencils, her favorite eraser, and the sudden bad feeling that Ariane might have been right about the classes at Sword and Cross. The teacher had yet to materialize. The flimsy desks were arranged in haphazard rows, and the supply closet was barricaded with stacks of dusty boxes piled in front of it. What was worse, none of the other kids seemed to notice the disarray. In fact, none of the other kids seemed to notice that they were in a classroom at all. They all stood clustered near the windows, taking one last drag of a cigarette here, repositioning the extra large safety pins on their t-shirts there. Only Todd was seated at an actual desk, carving something intricate onto its surface with his pen. But the other new students seemed to have already found their places among the crowd. Cam had the preppy Dover-looking guys in a tight cluster around him. They must have been friends when he was enrolled at Sword and Cross the first time. Gabe was shaking hands with the tongue-pierced girl who'd been making out with the tongue-pierced guy outside. Luz felt stupidly envious that she wasn't daring enough to do anything but take a seat closer to the unthreatening Todd. Ariane filtered about the others, whispering things Luz couldn't make out, like some sort of goth princess. When she passed Cam, he tousled her newly chopped hair. "Nice mop, Ariane," he smirked, tugging on a strand at the back of her neck. "My compliments to your stylist." Ariane swatted him away. "Hands off, Cam," which is to say, in your dreams. She jerked her head in Luz's direction. "And you can give your compliments to my new pet right over there." Cam's emerald eyes sparkled at Luz, who stiffened. "I believe I will," he said, and started walking toward her. He smiled at Luz, who was sitting with her ankles crossed under her chair and her hands folded neatly on her heavily graffiti desk. "Us new kids have to stick together," he said. "You know what I mean? But I thought you'd been here before. Don't believe everything Ariane says." He glanced back at Ariane, who was standing at the window eyeing them suspiciously. "Oh no, she didn't say anything about you," Luz said quickly, trying to remember whether or not that was actually true. It was clear Cam and Ariane didn't like each other, and even though Luz was grateful to Ariane for taking her around this morning, she wasn't ready to pick any sides yet. "I remember when I was a new kid here, the first time." He laughed to himself. "My band had just broken up and I was lost. I didn't know anyone. I could have used someone without," he glanced at Ariane, "an agenda to show me the ropes." "What?" Luz said, surprised to hear a flirting glint in her voice. An easy smile spread across Cam's face. He raised one eyebrow at her. "And to think I didn't want to come back here." Luz blushed. She didn't usually get involved with rocker guys, but then again, none of them had ever pulled the desk next to her even closer, plopped down beside her, and stared at her with eyes quite so green. Cam reached into his pocket and pulled out a green guitar pick with the number 44 printed on it. "This is my room number. Come by any time." The guitar pick wasn't far from the color of Cam's eyes, and Luz wondered how and when he had these printed up. But before she could answer, and who knew what she would have answered, Ariane clamped a hard hand down on Cam's shoulder. "I'm sorry. Did I not make myself clear? I've already called dibs on this one." Cam snorted. He looked straight at Luz as he said, "See, I thought there were still such a thing as free will. Maybe your pet has a path of her own in mind." Luz opened her mouth to claim that, of course, she had a path. It was just her first day here, and she was still figuring out the ropes. By the time she was able to get the words straight in her head, the minute warning bell rang, and the little gathering over Luz's desk dissolved. The other kids filed into their desks around her, and soon it stopped being so noteworthy that Luz was sitting prime and proper at her desk, keeping her eye on the door, keeping a lookout for Daniel. Out of the corner of her eye, she could feel Cam sneaking peeks at her. She felt flattered and nervous, then frustrated with herself. "Daniel? Cam? She'd been at the school for what, 45 minutes? And her mind was already juggling 2 different guys? The whole reason she was at the school at all was because the last time she'd been interested in the guy, things had gone horribly, horribly wrong. She should not be allowing herself to get all smitten. Twice! On her very first day of school. She looked over at Cam, who winked at her again, then brushed his dark hair away from his eyes, staggering good looks aside. Yeah, right. He really did seem like a useful person to know. Like her, he was still adjusting to the setting, but had clearly been around the Sword and Cross block a few times before. And he was nice to her. She thought about the green guitar pick with his room number, hoping he didn't give those out freely. They could be friends. Maybe that was all she needed. Maybe then she would stop feeling quite so obviously out of place at Sword and Cross. Maybe then she'd be able to forgive the fact that the only window in the classroom was the size of a business envelope, caked with lime, and looked out on a massive mausoleum in the cemetery. Maybe then she'll be able to forget the nose-tickling odor of peroxide emanating from the bleached blonde punk chick sitting in front of her. Maybe then she could actually pay attention to the stern, mustached teacher who marched into the room, commanded the class to shape up and sit down, and firmly closed the door. The smallest tweak of disappointment tugged at her heart. It took her a moment to trace where it had come from, until the teacher shut the door. She'd been holding out a little hope that Daniel would be in her first class too. What she did have next hour, French? She looked down at her schedule to check what room it was in. Just then, a paper airplane skidded across her schedule, overshot her desk, and landed on the floor by her bag. She checked to see who noticed, but the teacher was busy tearing through a piece of chalk as he wrote something on the board. Luce glanced nervously to her left. When Cam looked over at her, he gave her a wink and a flirty little wave that caused her whole body to tense out. But he didn't seem to have seen or been responsible for the paper airplane. Psst, came the quiet whisper behind him. It was Ariane, who motioned with her chin for Luce to pick up the paper airplane. Luce bent down to reach for it and saw her name written in small black letters on the wing. Her first note. Already looking for the exit? Not a good sign. We're in this hellhole until lunch. That had to be a joke. Luce double-checked her schedule and realized with horror that all 3 of her morning classes were in the very same room 1. And all 3 would be taught by the very same Mr. Cole. He detached himself from the blackboard and was sleepily threading his way through the room. There was no introduction for the new kids, and Luce couldn't decide whether she was glad about that or not. Mr. Cole merely slapped syllabi down on each of the 4 new students' desks. When the stapled packet landed in front of Luce, she leaned forward eagerly to take a look. History of the World, it read. Circumventing the Doom of Mankind. History had always been her strongest subject, but circumventing doom? A closer at the syllabus was all it took for Luce to see that Ariane had been right about being in a hellhole. An impossible reading load. Test in big, bold letters every 3rd class period, and a 30-page paper on, seriously, the failed tyrant of your choice? Thick black parentheses had been drawn in black Sharpie around the assignments Luce had missed during the first few weeks. In the margins, Mr. Cole had written, "See me for makeup research assignment." If there was a more effective way of soul-sucking, Luce would be scared to find out. At least she had Ariane sitting back there in the next row. Luce was glad the precedent had already been set for SOS note passing. She and Callie used to text each other on the sly, but to make it here, Luce was definitely going to need to learn to fold a paper airplane. She tore a sheet from her notebook and tried to use Ariane's as a model. After a few origami challenge minutes, another plane landed on her desk. She glanced back at Ariane, who shook her head and gave her a "you have so much to learn" roll of the eyes. Luce shrugged an apology and swiveled back around to open the second note. "Oh, and until you're confident about your aim, You might not want to fly any Daniel-related messages my way. Dude behind you is famous on the football field for his interceptions. Good to know. She hadn't even seen Daniel's friend Roland come in behind her. Now she turned very slightly in her seat until she glimpsed his dreadlocks out of the corner of her eye. She dared a glance down at the open notebook on his desk and caught his full name, Roland Sparks. No note passing, Mr. Cole said sternly, causing Luz to whip her head back to attention. No plagiarizing and no looking at another's papers. I didn't put myself through graduate school only to receive your divided attention. Luz nodded in unison with the other day's kids just as a third plane glided to a stop in the middle of her desk. Only 172 minutes to go. 173 torturous minutes later, Ariane was leading Luz to the cafeteria. "What'd you think?" she asked. "You were right," Luz said numbly, still recovering from how painfully bleak her first 3 hours of class had been. Why would anyone teach such a depressing subject? Aw, Coley's up soon. He puts on his no-guff face every time there's a new student. Anyway, Ariane said, poking Luz, "It could be worse. You could have gotten stuck with Miss Tross." Luz glanced down at her schedule. "I have her for biology in the afternoon block," she said with a sinking feeling in her gut. As Ariane sputtered out a laugh, Luz felt a bump on her shoulder. It was Cam, passing them in the hallway on his way to lunch. Luz would have gone sprawling if not for his hand reaching back to steady her. Hey guys, so I was wondering if you wanted a webcam or no webcam while I read the book. So I'm going to try it for just a few minutes of this video, and if you guys do like it, don't forget to leave a thumbs up. So let's continue with the book. I just wanted to interrupt the video just for a little bit. Let's continue. "Easy there." He shot her a quick smile, and she wondered if he had bumped her intentionally, but he didn't seem that juvenile. Luz glanced at Ariane to see whether she noticed anything. Ariane raised her eyebrows, almost inviting Luz to speak, but neither one of them said a thing. When they crossed the dusty interior windows separating Bleak Hall from Bleaker Cafeteria, Ariane took hold of Luz's elbow. "Avoid the chicken fried steak at all costs," she coached as they followed the crowd into the den of the lunchroom. "The pizza's fine. The chili's okay. And actually, the borscht ain't bad. Do you like meatloaf?" "I'm a vegetarian," Luz said. She was glancing around the tables, looking for two people in particular, Daniel and Cam. She'd just feel more at ease if she knew where they were so she could go about having her lunch pretending that she didn't see either one of them. But so far, no sightings. "Vegetarian, huh?" Ariane pursed her lips. "Hippie parents or your own meager attempt at rebellion?" Neither. I just don't like meat." Ariane steered Luz's shoulders 90 degrees so that she was looking directly at Daniel, sitting at a table across the room. Luz let out a long exhale. There he was. "Now, does that go for all meat?" Ariane sang loudly. "Like you wouldn't sink your teeth into him?" Luz slugged Ariane and dragged her toward the lunch line. Ariane was cracking up, but Luz knew she was blushing badly, which would be exoneratingly obvious in this fluorescent lighting. "Shut up! He totally heard you," she whispered. Part of Luz felt glad to be joking about boys with a friend, assuming Ariane was her friend. She still felt unglued by what had happened this morning when she seen Daniel. That pull toward him, she still didn't understand where it came from, and yet here it was again. She made herself tear her eyes away from his blonde hair, from the smooth line of his jaw. She refused to be caught staring. She did not want to give him any reason to flip her off a second time. "Whatever," Ariane scoffed. "He's so focused on that hamburger, he wouldn't hear that call of Satan." She gestured at Daniel, who did look intensely focused on chewing his burger. Scratch that. He looked like someone pretending to be intensely focused on chewing on his hamburger. Luz glanced across the table at Daniel's friend Roland. He was looking straight at her. When he caught her eye, he waggled his eyebrows in a way that Luz couldn't make sense of, but that still creeped her out a little. Luz turned back to Ariane. Why is everyone at this school so weird? I'm going to choose not to take offense to that, Ariane said, picking up a plastic tray and handing one to Luz. And I'm going to move on to explaining the fine art of selecting a cafeteria seat. You see, you never want to sit anywhere near the... Luz, look out! All Luz did was take one step backward, but as soon as she did, she felt the rough shove of two hands on her shoulders. Immediately, she knew she was going down. She reached out in front of her for support, but all her hands found was someone else's full lunch tray. The whole thing tumbled down right along with her. She landed with a thud on the cafeteria floor, a full cup of broche in her face. When she wiped enough mushy beads out of her eyes to see, Luz looked up. The angriest pixie she's ever seen was standing over her. The girl had spiky bleached hair, at least 10 piercings on her face, and a death glare. She bared her teeth at Luz and hissed, "If the sight of you hadn't just ruined my appetite, I'd make you buy me another lunch." Luz stammered an apology. She tried to get up, but the girl clamped the heel of her black stiletto boot down on Luz's foot. Pain shot up her leg, and she had to bite her lip so she wouldn't cry out. "Why don't I just take a rain check?" the girl said. "That's enough, Molly," Ariane said coolly. She reached down to help Luz to her feet. Luz winced. The stiletto was definitely going to leave a bruise. Molly squared her hips to face Ariane, and Luz got the feeling this was not the first time they locked horns. "Fast friends with the newbie, I see," Molly growled. "This is very bad behavior, eh? Aren't you supposed to be on probation?" Luz swallowed. Ariane hadn't mentioned anything about probation, and it didn't make sense that would prohibit her from making new friends. But the word was enough to make Ariane clench her fist and throw a fat punch that landed on Molly's right eye. Molly wheeled backward, but it was Ariane who caught Luz's attention. She began convulsing, her arms thrown up and jerking in the air. It was the wristband. Luz realized with horror. It was sending some sort of shock through Ariane's body. Unbelievable. This was cruel and unusual punishment. For sure. Luz's stomach churned as she watched her friend's entire body quake. She reached out to catch Ariane just as she sank to the floor. "Ariane," Luz whispered. "Are you okay?" "Terrific." Ariane's dark eyes flickered open, then shut. Luz gasped. Then one of Ariane's eyes popped back open. "Scared you, didn't I?" "Aw, that's sweet. Don't worry, the shocks won't kill me," she whispered. "They only make me stronger. Anyway, it was worth it to give that cow a black eye, you know." "All right, break it up, a husky voice boomed behind them. Randy stood in the doorway, red-faced and breathing hard. It was a little too late to break anything up, Luz thought, but then Molly was lurking toward them, her stiletto heels clicking on the linoleum. This girl was shameless. Was she really going to kick the crap out of Ariane with Randy standing right there? Luckily, Randy's blurry arms closed around her first. Molly tried to kick her way out and started screaming. "Somebody better start talking," Randy barked, squeezing Molly until she went limp. "On second thought, all 3 of you report for detention tomorrow morning. Cemetery, crack of dawn." Randy looked at Molly. "Have you chilled yet?" Molly nodded stiffly, and Randy released her. She crouched down to where Ariane still lay in Luz's lap, her arms crossed over her chest. At first, Luz thought Ariane was sulking, like an angry dog with a shock collar. But then Luz felt a small jolt of Ariane's body and realized that the girl was still at the mercy of the wristband. "Come on," Randy said more softly. "Let's go turn you off." She extended her hand to Ariane and helped heave her tiny shaking body, turning back only once at the doorway to repeat her orders for Luz and Molly. "Crack of dawn." "Looking forward to it," Molly said sweetly, reaching down to pick up the plate of meatloaf that had slipped from her tray. She dangled it over Luz's head for a second, then turned the plate upside down and mashed the food into her hair. Luz could hear the squish of her own mortification as all of Sword and Cross got its viewing of the meatloaf-coated new girl. "Priceless," Molly said, pulling out the tiniest silver camera from the back pocket of her black jeans. "Say, meatloaf." she sang, snapping a few close-up shots. "These will be great on my blog." "Nice hat," someone jeered from the other side of the cafeteria. Then, with trepidation, Luz turned her eyes to Daniel, praying that somehow he had missed this whole scene. But no, he was shaking his head. He looked annoyed. Until that moment, Luz had thought she had a chance at standing up and just shaking off the incident. Literally. But seeing Daniel's reaction, well, it finally made her crack. She would not cry in front of any of these horrible people. She swallowed hard, got to her feet, and took off. She rushed toward the nearest door, eager to feel some cool air on her face. Instead, the southern September humidity cloaked her, choking her, as soon as she got outside. The sky was that no-color color. A grayish-brown so oppressively bland it was difficult even to find the sun. Luz slowed down, but got as far as the edge of the parking lot before she came to a complete stop. She longed to see her battered old car there, to sink into the fraying cloth seat, rev the engine, crank up the stereo, and peel the hell out of this place. But as she stood on the hot black pavement, reality set in. She was stuck here, and a pair of towering metal gates separated her from the world outside Sword Cross. Besides, even if she had a way out, where was she going to go? The sick feeling in her gut told her all she needed to know. She was already at the last stop, and things were looking pretty grim. It was as depressing as it was true. Sword Cross was all she had. She dropped her face into her hands, knowing she had to go back. But when she lifted her head, the residue on her palm reminded her that she was still coated in Molly's meatloaf. Ugh! First stop, the nearest bathroom. Back inside, Luz ducked into the girls' room just as the door was swinging open. Gabe, who appeared even more blonde and flawless now that Luz looked like she'd just gone dumpster diving, squeezed past. "Whoops! Excuse me, honey," she said. Her southern accent voice was sweet, but her face crumpled up at the sight of Luz. "Oh God, you look terrible. What happened?" What happened? As if the whole school didn't already know? This girl was probably playing dumb, so Luz would relive the whole mortifying scene. "Wait 5 minutes," Luz replied, with more of an edge in her voice than she meant. "I'm sure gossip spreads like the plague around here." "You want to borrow my foundation?" Gabe asked, holding up a pastel blue cosmetic case. "You haven't seen yourself yet, but you're going to." "Thanks, but no." Luz cut her off, pushing into the bathroom without looking at herself in the mirror. She turned on the faucet, she splashed cold water on her face, and finally let it all out. Tears streaming, she pumped the soap dispenser and tried to use some of the cheap pink powdered hand soap to scrub off the meatloaf. But there was still the matter of her hair, and her clothes had definitely looked and smelt better. Not that she needed to worry about making a good first impression anymore. The bathroom door cracked open and Luz scrambled against the wall like a trapped animal. When a stranger walked in, Luz stiffened and waited for the worst. The girl had a squat build, accentuated by an abnormal amount of layered clothing. Her wide face was surrounded by curly brown hair, and her bright purple glasses wobbled when she sniffed. She looked fairly amusing, but then, looks could be deceiving. Both her hands were tucked behind her back in a way that, after the day Luz had had, she just couldn't trust. "You know, you're not supposed to be in here without a pass," the girl said. Her even tone seemed to be mean business. "I know." The look in the girl's eyes confirmed Luz's suspicion that it was absolutely impossible to catch a break at this place. She started to sigh and surrender. I'm kidding," the girl laughed, rolling her eyes and relaxing her posture. "I snagged some shampoo from the locker room for you," she said, bringing her hands around to display 2 innocent-looking plastic bottles of shampoo and conditioner. "Come on," she said, pulling over a beat-up folding chair. "Let's get you cleaned up. Sit here." A half-whimpering, half-laughing noise she never made before escaped from Luz's lips. She guessed, like relief. The girl was actually being nice to her. Not just reform school nice, but regular person nice. For no apparent reason. The shock of it was almost too great for Luz to stand. "Thanks?" Luz managed to say, still feeling a little bit guarded. "Oh, and you probably need a change of clothes," the girl said, looking down at her black sweater and pulling it over her head to expose the identical black sweater underneath. When she saw the surprised look on Luz's face, she said, "What? I have a hostile immune system. I have to wear a lot of layers." "Oh, well, will you be okay without this one?" Luce made herself ask, even though she would have done just about anything right then to get out of the meat cloak she was wearing. Of course, the girl said, waving her off. I've got 3 more under this one, and a couple more in my locker. Be my guest. It pains me to see a vegetarian covered in meat. I'm very empathetic. Luce wondered how this stranger knew about her dietary preferences, but more than that, she had to ask, why are you being so nice? The girl laughed, sighed, then shook her head. Not everyone at Sword and Cross is a whore or a jock. Huh? Luce said. Sword and Cross. Whores and jocks. Lame nickname in town for the school. Obviously, there aren't really any jocks here. I won't oppress your ears with some of the cruder nicknames they've come up with. Luce laughed. All I meant was, not everyone here is a complete jerk. Just the majority? Luce asked, hating it that she already sounded so negative. But it had been such a long morning, and she's already been through so much, and maybe this girl wouldn't judge her for being a little bit gruff. To her surprise, the girl smiled. Exactly. And they sure give the rest of us a bad name. She stuck out her hand. I'm Pennyweather, Van Snickle Lockwood. You can call me Pen. Got it, Luce said, still too frazzled to realize that, in a former life, she might have stifled a laugh at this girl's mock ear. It sounded like she hopped straight off the pages of a Dick Dixon novel. Then again, there was something trustworthy about a girl with a name like that who could manage to introduce herself with a straight face. I'm Lucinda Price. And everyone calls you Luce, Pen said. And you transferred from Dover Prep in New Hampshire. How'd you know that? Luce asked slowly. Lucky guess, Pen shrugged. I'm kidding. I read your file. Duh, it's a hobby. Luce stared at her blankly. Maybe she'd been too hasty with that trustworthy judgment. How could Pen have access to her file? Pen took over running the water. When it got warm, she motioned for Luce to lower her head into the sink. See? The thing is, she exclaimed, I'm not actually crazy. She pulled Luce up by her wet head. No offense. Then lowered her back down. I'm the only kid at the school without a court mandate, and you might not think it, but being legally sane has its advantages. For example, I'm also the only kid they trust to be an office aide, which is dumb on their part. I have access to a lot of confidential shit. But if you don't have to be here, when your father's the groundskeeper of the school, they kind of have to let you go for free. So, Pen trailed off. Pen's father was the groundskeeper? From the looks of the place, it hadn't crossed Luce's mind that they even had a groundskeeper. I know what you're thinking, Pen said, helping Luce shampoo the last of the gravy from her hair. That the grounds aren't exactly well kept. No, Luce lied. She was eager to stay on the girl's good side and wanted to put out the be my friend vibe way more than she wanted to seem like she actually cared about how often someone mowed the lawn at Sword and Cross. It's, really nice. Dad died 2 years ago, Pen said quietly. They got as far as sticking me with decaying old headmaster Udall as my legal guardian, but, they never really got around to hiring a replacement for Dad. I'm sorry, Luce said, lowering her voice too, so someone else here knew what it was like to go through a major loss. It's okay, Pen said, squirting conditioner into her palm. It's actually a really good school. I like it here a lot. Now Luce's head shot up, sending a spray of water across the bathroom. You sure you're not crazy? She teased. I'm kidding. I hate it here. It totally sucks. But you can't bring yourself to leave, Luce said, tilting her head curious. Pen bit her lip. I know, it's morbid, but even if I weren't stuck with Udo, I couldn't. My dad's here. She gestured toward the cemetery, invisible from here. He's all I've got. Then I guess you've got more than some other people at the school, Luce said, thinking of Ariane. Her mind rolled back to the way Ariane had gripped her hand on the quad today, the eager look in her blue eyes when she made Luce promise she'd swing by her dorm room tonight. She's gonna be okay, Pen said. It wouldn't be Monday if Ariane didn't get carted off to the nurse office after a fit. But it wasn't a fit, Luce said. It was that wristband. I saw it. It was shocking her. We have a very broad definition of what makes for a fit here at Sword and Cross. Your new enemy, Molly, she's thrown some legendary fits. They keep saying they're going to change her meds. hopefully you'll have the pleasure of witnessing at least one good freak out before they do. Pen's intel was pretty remarkable. It crossed Luce's mind to ask her what the story was with Daniel, but the complicated intensity of her interest in him was probably best kept to a need-to-know basis, at least until she figured it out for herself. She left Pen's hands wringing the water from her hair. "That's the last of it," Pen said. "I think you're finally meat-free." Luce looked in the mirror and ran her hands through her hair. Pen was right, except for the emotional scarring and the pain in her right foot. There was no evidence of her bacteria brawl with Molly. "I'm just glad you have short hair," Pen said. "If it were as long as it was in the picture in your file, this would have been a much lengthier operation." Luce gawked at her. "I'm going to have to keep an eye on you, aren't I?" Pen looped her arm around Luce's and steered her out of the bathroom. "Just stay on my good side and no one gets hurt." Luce shot Pen a worried look, but Pen's face gave nothing away. "You're kidding, right?" Luce asked. Pen smiled, suddenly cheery. "Come on! We gotta get to class. Aren't you glad we're in the same afternoon block?" Luce laughed. "When are you going to stop knowing everything about me?" Not in the foreseeable future," Pen said, tugging her down the hall and back toward the cinder block classrooms. "You'll learn to love it soon. I promise. I'm a very powerful friend to have."